It's incredible to see what Waterman has achieved. I mean, close to $10 million over the years. It's just incredible. So a big shout out to everyone that's been involved. Paul Modee, one of my old mates from the Bay of Plenty, and everyone else. So tonight, it's very bittersweet. A lot of love going out to Oliver Tomson and to Oliver's aunties as well from South Africa, Jennifer and Mandy. And I wanted to say some personal words about a genius. And I don't use that word lightly. In our particular field of surfing, there's not that many geniuses out there. And Mike Tomson was certainly one. He had a profound influence on our culture, lifestyle, business, and mentored. I know, I'm looking around here, mentored a lot of people in this group. So I wrote some words, and I know I'm going to go over time here, but I want to read some words that I wrote about my beautiful cousin. So Mike was born on an auspicious day, the 24th of August, the same day as Duke Kahanamoku, both of our heroes when we grew up. And also my beautiful son Luke's born on that same day. Many people play a part in forming our lives. Mom and dad, friends and teachers are often the biggest influences. My cousin Mike played a big part in the trajectory of my life. We were born 3 days apart, Mike a year older. We caught our first waves together on the same type of surfboard on the same day at the Bay of Plenty. We were all Bay boys, including Paul Modee here. We surfed in our first contest together, went with my brother Paul to J Bay on our first safari, to Hawaii on the same pilgrimage. On an early trip, Mike and I even shared a pop-up caravan together on the North Shore at Haleiwa. In the surf, Mike was the most courageous surfer I had ever seen, and I'd seen a few. Bay of Plenty, Cave Rock, Sunset Beach, and Pipeline. Wowee. At Pipeline, he was a gladiator, throwing himself over the edge into horrendous double-up tubes. There's a picture of him right up there. Mike carved his own path. Like he said, no one took off deeper. And that's how Mike lived his life, full on, maxed out. In his early 20s, and very few of you know this, he wrote an op-ed in the most famous newspaper in the world, the New York Times, about apartheid in sport that created a firestorm in his homeland of South Africa. He did honors in business at Natal University, studied Peter Drucker with the same fervor he read Norman Mailer and Hunter S. Thompson. He created South Africa's first Rolling Stone type magazine out of his bedroom, down the line, and employed the country's best writers and photographers. So he was a great surfer, he was a thinker, a university student, and an incredible journalist. He was the youngest brand manager ever for the biggest company in South Africa called Unilever. And he was a writer and editor at Surfing Magazine. And until Geordie Smith, he was the only other South African ever to win a major professional event, placing number 5 on the IPS World Tour in 1976, the year he started Gotcha, while he was on tour. It grew into the hottest, most creative surf company ever, employing the world's best designers and the world's best surfers. He hired the best and brightest from across the planet, changing the lives of thousands with his boundless creativity and force of will. You know, when I think of Mike, I think of commitment, man, gnarly commitment. The guy would paddle over the edge on anything. I think of confidence. When my cousin would walk into a room, man, he'd light it up. Everyone wanted to be next to Mike. And just that creativity was mind-blowing. And if there was a trend bubbling up in Tokyo or New York or London, Mike knew about it before it bubbled over. Gotcha soared into the stratosphere, 120 million bucks, I remember. Got too big, so he started MCD, more core division. And with his brands assembled the greatest, hippest, coolest, edgiest surf team on the planet. Martin Potter, Shane Horan, Jerry Lopez, Mike Stewart, Sonny Garcia, Brock Little, Rob Machado, the Ho brothers, Dino Andino, Matt Archibald, and yes, Andy Irons too. He wrote the insightful words that have been stolen and requoted by millions and ignored by thousands more domkops And if you don't know what a domkop is, you can ask the attorney, Bernie, where are you? Bernie Wolfdas, what's a domkop? Bernie, shout out what a domkop is. Huh? Yeah, a nitwit. He wrote the insightful words that have been stolen and requoted by millions and ignored by thousands more domkops across every growth industry. Size is the enemy of cool. Size is the enemy of cool, and that has killed more surfing brands than anything else. He had influences, Jan Wenner from Rolling Stone for one, but nothing with Mike was derivative. He was a font of creativity and originality, and if there was an envelope to be pushed, Mike mowed it down. He had the Gotcha Pro at Sandy Beach, surf's first rock and roll event, and then followed it up with the first ever event at Chopu that's going on right now in Tahiti. Yeah, Mike was just out there. Then he made Surfers, the movie, one of the greatest surfing movies ever, even getting Mickey Dora to finally go on screen in an unforgettable scene. A lot of surfers have had a hand in changing surfing's path. An innovative board, a new style, a new brand, new music. There are a lot of one-trick ponies out there, and they are damn good tricks and damn good ponies. Mike Tomson built a stable of ponies, and only Kelly Slater comes close to Mike's breadth of achievements. Hell, even Kelly said when he was young, all I wanted to do was surf for Gotcha. I co-produced a film a few years back. It was called Bustin' Down the Door. It chronicled the drama associated with the birth of pro surfing. The best line in the movie is Mike's, and this is a line that's more core division to the max. I will surf until I die. And he did just that. I'd like to show a video. Oh, Mark's here. Oh, we got some words from one of Mike's compadres, Mark Price.
Yeah, Mark.
Good evening. At the risk of being presumptuous, in case nobody missed me earlier, I've actually been quite under the weather the last couple of days with some dementia and some nausea. It's not COVID, in case anyone came near me. So apologies in advance. And Sean and I probably should have coordinated a little bit because there's some overlap between what we have to say, but I'm going to go for it anyway. You know, for those who don't know, I met MT when I was 13 and I worked at Gotcha for 12 years. And to say that my relationship with MT was complex would be like asking if bears shit in the woods, which was one of his favorite sayings. And it's obvious, it was complex. He was part mentor, older brother, and at times even paternal. So apologies in advance if I drop a couple personal anecdotes and weave those into the rich tapestry of the narrative that is MT, which is far, far greater than anything that I could personally experience. For example, after dropping out of my final year, going into my final year at university, my dad wanted to meet the guy who was responsible for that, because at the time, Gotcha was sponsoring me to go on the world tour. MT sat down with my dad, and in a moment that freaked me out at the time, my dad stuck his finger in MT's face and said, "You better look after my son." And I'll come back to that later. MT and action sports. One more disclaimer. There are many people who contributed to Gotcha's success, but there's one person who stands head and shoulders over the rest. And I would, if you accept the premise that execution is the chariot of genius, then if you lived in Roman times, Joel Cooper would have been Lewis Hamilton. That said, how do you distill MT's career down to a few words? What benchmarks should we use? Did he create a successful company that helped define a marketplace? Perhaps he impacted the culture beyond his specific achievements. Did he inspire the next generation of business leaders? MT did all that and more, and perhaps most of you are familiar with many of these things, so I won't go down the list too much. Instead, what I'd rather try and do is place MT's legacy in the right context and perspective. And I think it takes on a particular resonance when you look at it from that point of view. For many in the audience tonight, and certainly most of the action sports world, their first real introduction to MT was when Gotcha joined other nascent surf brands in the emerging US surf clothing market, as legacy brands like OP and Lightning Bolt were fading away. And at first glance, they probably thought he was just the latest athlete turned businessman, certainly something they'd seen before. What only the passage of time could bring into sharp focus was that this was a mind like few others, a razor-sharp intellect, nurtured by an extensive education, a rabid curiosity about the world, and a voracious appetite for the written word and for music in particular. And as Sean mentioned, let us not forget the real-world business experience as a brand manager at Unilever. He just happened to surf really, really well. And he was used to staking out controversial positions and taking the heat from an early age. Sean mentioned Down the Line magazine, which Michael founded in his early 20s. I remember one of the covers, which featured a young woman on a Husqvarna dirt bike with the provocative title, "In My Next Life, I'm Coming Back as a Man." MT was already mixing surfing and popular culture from day one in his early 20s, and I'm not even mentioning the sports boycott op-ed, because we've all done that. Moving forward, Gotcha arrived in the US in the 70s, and that leads us to another aspect of MT's career that is often overlooked. One that highlights both the extraordinary triumph and tragedy that are inextricably linked in MT's story. Gotcha was in fact a very short-lived company at the top of its game, and yet in a relatively short period of time, a little over 10 years, the company redefined what action sports brands could be and laid the foundation for what we see around us. And let's face it, as mentioned above, while many of us played important roles in those accomplishments, Gotcha was literally the embodiment of MT himself. Brash, irrelevant, innovative, multidimensional, and committed. In truth, there are many action sports industry icons over the years who have accomplished incredible things and are without question deserving of their stature. And I realize that the mere suggestion that it is someone who sits on top of the action sports org chart, for want of a better description, may imply an ever slight dulling of their luster. But I'm going to make the case anyway, that MT is the action sports CEO emeritus. Remember, it's so much easier to build on a foundation once it's in place than to build it from scratch. MT had no endemic roadmap for what Gotcha was to become. Nothing like Gotcha had come before in action sports, because no one like MT had come before. And he charted a course for Gotcha that we have followed since. We have all followed since to some degree. MT married all the influences that we commonly refer to as youth culture and wove them into an unparalleled creative narrative that Gotcha championed when it was at the top of its game. He was eternally curious and always looking for the edge. As Sean mentioned, he shopped the world looking for fashion influences. Gotcha worked with some of the most talented art directors and designers around the world, designed clothes for punk bands, and hired a designer who came from Versace, of all places, as well as advertising buys and interview magazine and details, things that surf brands just had never done before, probably never thought of before. The apparel catalogs were literally works of art. Never mind the mind-blowing trade show booths. I remember the frequent logo changes that used to drive the operational legal staff nuts. The in-your-face ad campaigns and the incredible parties, at least the ones that I remember. And as I've taken on more responsibility over the course of my career, I've realized how gutsy he was in many of the calls that he made. Everyone remembers the in-your-face, if you don't surf, don't start ad campaign. And many of us think it's one of the best ever.
It is, yeah.
I think we've got an image of it. If we don't, the headline speaks for itself, but the subject matter were weird photos of non-surfers with a little bit of a insult, shall we say, to those who did not surf. Well, imagine you're the CEO of the largest action sports brand in the world at that time, and your company's distribution profile was generating a shit ton of money from what we affectionately call the non-endemic market today. And you're about to basically tell all your customers to fuck off. And let's decide the size of that middle finger for one moment. Gotcha's turnover at that time was probably around $80 to $90 million. And I think it's fair to argue that the action sports industry today is at least 20 to 30 times bigger than it was 35 years ago. So Gotcha was no small niche upstart company looking to make a name for itself. So here's a guy in his early 30s running a multi-billion-dollar brand, and he's deciding whether to run this campaign. Sure, it was obviously going to bolster our cred in the core market, but it was just an advertising campaign. We could easily have run another option, not in MT's world, which calls attention to another character trait that MT had in spades that was pivotal to Gotcha's success. That's courage. Not only was he an incredible creative being, but he also had the courage to manifest that creativity. This cannot be overstated. Creativity without courage is like a Ferrari without gas in the tank. Sure, it's beautiful to look at, but it's not going anywhere. Okay, now that we've firmly established.
Yeah, Mark.
Okay, now that we've firmly established that we all report to MT, what about his broader legacy? Of course, he led what many consider to be the most influential action sports brand ever, co-founded SIMA with Bob McKnight, and along with Bill Delaney of Free Ride fame, conceived of and produced Surfers the movie, one of the most important films ever, and as Sean mentioned, the Gotcha Pro at Chopu. However, that doesn't even consider the post-Gotcha careers that were launched and the profound influence all those people had on today's action sports industry. There are at least a couple tables worth here tonight, and not everyone is even here. I could go on, and all of this in a little over 10 years. And so to bring the conversation full circle, let's stop for a moment and think about MT's impact and what it could have been if his tenure at the top of his game had lasted 20 years or even 30 years. If he had not succumbed to his demons at a relatively young age, what would his legacy be? If he were around today with the power of social media at his disposal, what would he be saying to the world? What other taboos and norms would he have broken, and how much better off would we all be as a result of that? To me, it's a question with an obvious answer, and deep down, we all know it. Let's be frank. Every genre and generation have had their casualties, and unfortunately, MT's was ours when viewed through that narrow aperture. There's no harm in recognizing that sad fact. However, as the years have gone by, I've come to realize that what he got right could not be diminished by what he got wrong. And anyone who tries to arrive at a compromised net effect is missing the wood for the trees. He was and always will be one of the greatest leaders our tribe has ever had, and one who unfortunately embraced one of his idols' lyrics all too well. You know the song, "Hey, hey, my, rock and roll is here to stay. It's better to burn out than to fade away. Hey, my, hey, hey." In closing, I'd like to come back to the story about MT and my dad. In the early 80s, I was playing smash ball at Ranch Laguna with a young lady I was dating at the time. Afterwards, I walked over to MT and he pointed straight at her and he said, "She's the one, you should marry her." I was like 22. Fast forward 35 years later and reconnecting with Kim, who I am finally married to, by the way, standing right over there. We saw MT together quite a few times before he passed away because Kim knew him well from her days in Laguna as well as I did. While sharing many stories and cathartic moments, I reminded him about that day at Thalia, and he looked over at Kim with that mischievous MT grin and he winked. And in that moment, as I took stock of where my life was at, there was no question that MT had delivered on his promise to my dad so many years ago. And I was simultaneously overcome by the love I felt towards this person who had played such a prominent role in my life, coupled with a heartbreaking and profound sense of impending loss. Restless, but in peace, MT. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Now we have a video of Mike Tomson.
Who put it all on the line to create a sport, a culture, and an industry that's today worth tens of billions of dollars and has captured the imagination of the world.
None of this was planned. You have to understand that, you know? I don't care what anyone says. This is just it was evolution. You know what I mean? We, meaning the South Africans and the Australians, we grew up surfing a certain way. That was the only way we knew how. So when we came to Hawaii, that was how we surfed. It happened to be different. It happened to break boundaries.
They all developed a way of actually delaying the bottom turn a little bit and getting their body in a position where they could get tube backside high, which was sort of thought to be fairly impossible.
Michael Thompson's sheer falls.
I don't think anyone took off deeper than me. I say that now for sure. With absolute, unequivocal certainty. I think it's the most important thing I did as a surfer because it stayed with me forever. You know? The photograph stands. The vision in my mind, I can see it. It's absolutely beautiful and they're terrifying too. Very few people can go through life and say that they've been doing something for 45 years. You know, what have you been doing for 45 years? I will serve till I die.
Wow. I'd like to bring up Oliver Tomson to accept Mike Tomson's Lifetime Achievement Award. Oliver.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to say how honored I am to be here, to be among all of you. What I like to think of as my greater family. I mean, I've grown up with half of you, honestly. I mean, I know every single person in this room. It's amazing. So, we're talking about someone who happens to be my father, so I feel very lucky to be here for that. But someone whose legacy can be felt through every generation of surfers, down to the fact that I was on Etsy last week and I saw a poster that said, "If you don't surf, don't start." So, you know, his dedication to authenticity, to surfing and its culture, to all of us who love this sport can never be understated. You know, for me, my father was always a figure that was larger than life, and it was hard for me to conceptualize his impact on the world that I call home. And to be completely honest with you, since he's passed, it's been my relationships with all of you. It has been, in my later life, getting to know all of you who were part and parcel to his success that have made me understand the true impact that he had on our industry and on the lives of every surfer and waterman, you know, on this earth. So all I can say is that from the bottom of my heart, thank you to all of you. Thank you for being there. Thank you for being part of this journey. And thank you for honoring my father, Michael Tomson, this evening with the Lifetime Achievement Award. If you all will indulge me, I would like to invite up Joel Cooper, my father's business partner and best friend, to say a couple words.
Yeah, Joel!